Hello ladies and gentlemen, today we're back in War Thunder and we're doing another comment response. This is from Legendary Toucan. Hello, first I want to say that I've been watching your videos for some time now and I really enjoyed them. They are very informative and enjoyable to watch. I was playing War Thunder about a year ago, but my PC was awful back then, and I couldn't really compete with other players. Now that I have a good one, I'm picking up the game once again, starting with a fresh account. I'm not really a newbie, I have some knowledge of the game, if not by playing myself, then from watching videos. I really want to plan everything out before I start for real. The thing that I'm thinking about before starting out is the crew slot management. I'm really worried about spending crew points on things that I will never use or allocating my vehicles in wrong slots. I'm only playing Air RB and Tanks RB. My thought process is that since I'm not playing arcade, I would put all aircraft in one slot. This would allow me to max out crew and use every plane to its max potential. But I have no idea what to do with tanks. I suppose I could put my mediums in slot number 2 and heavies in slot number 3, but then how to utilize remaining slots? AA doesn't really need dedicated slots, so I would put them in the same slot as my tank destroyers. That would be slot number 4, and swap them whenever I feel so. And then there is slot number 5. My initial idea was to put there all bombers, to have some choice between fighter, attacker and bomber in Tanks RB, but that destroys my idea of putting every aircraft in one slot and maximizing its crew. That may seem to you like an exaggeration, but that's just how I look at it. I'm always trying to do things as efficient as I can. Maybe you have some thoughts and ideas about a universal loadout for RB only. That would be amazing. Have a nice day and keep up your amazing work on YouTube. So thank you, Legendary Toucan. And, well, let's get straight into it. I'll use my British crews, my German crews, and my American crews for this example. So, the first thing that I always, or at least I decided upon, when I started playing tanks, was that I was going to have 1 or 2 slots for aircraft and 3 slots for tanks. The reason for this is because in Tank Arcade, if you ever want to play it, well, Tank Arcade has 3 spawns, so therefore it makes sense to have 3 crews. Now, since you are basing it exactly only on realistic, then it comes down to how proficient you are in tanks compared to how proficient you are in aircraft. Now for me, I know for a fact I can do quite a lot in aircraft, and, you know, maybe I can do well in tanks. So it's basically a question of, do you think you need 4 slots for tanks and 1 for an aircraft, or 3 slots for tanks and 2 for aircraft? You have to make a value judgment on how you play the game, and if you think personally that you are more useful in an aircraft or in a tank. When it comes to the aircraft slots, because I believe, for myself personally, that I am quite useful in an aircraft in the air, not just for killing tanks, but also for killing other aircraft, I dedicate a fighter slot. Now this fighter, in this case, is the Spitfire F Mark 24. Now the Spitfire F Mark 24, if I actually had all the upgrades, would carry bombs and rockets, so therefore it would be a perfect example of a fighter that you should bring into battle. An example of a fighter which you could bring in to battle, which is kind of like that, is the P-47N. You want this fighter-attacker hybrid that does really well in ground forces, because if the situation is that the enemy is dominating the air, then, well, you need the fighter part. If you are needed in the attacker role, then your fighter needs to be able to carry ordnance, and as you can see, the P-47 is pretty good at that. So, for me, the first slot should be dedicated to a fighter, but also has some ordnance capabilities. Now, the majority of fighters in the game do have ordnance capabilities, but it doesn't have to, right? So this slot here for me is the fighter slot. Now, if we're talking about complete and utter efficiency, then we're talking about a slot which has a fighter in it, which also has ordnance, but it doesn't need to have ordnance. It just needs to be a fighter. If it has ordnance, it is a bonus, basically. Now, the next slot along, which is my second fighter or aircraft slot, is either a light bomber, a heavy bomber, or an attacker. The best way to describe this is you want a plane, such as a fighter, which has really good fighting capabilities against planes, but something which can also do something against tanks, and then you want something lined up which will do a lot of damage to tanks just in themselves. When it comes to tank realistic battles, at the end of the day, what happens is well, tanks win that battle. You cannot win the battle from the air, so therefore when you are in the air, you have to make a difference. And generally making a difference in ground RB is killing tanks on the ground, not necessarily killing planes. So that's why I have a whole squad basically dedicated to not just ground pounding, but also carpet bombing and stuff like that. This is the bomber slash, attacker role. And obviously, in the British tree, you don't have a ton of attackers. You have the Firefly, the Firebrand, and that's really about it. It's the Bowfighters, if you want to add them. So therefore, the majority of the stuff, as you can see, my Sterling goes in here, my Lancaster goes in here, the other Lancaster goes in here. Where does the Bowfighter go, actually? Yeah, once again in here. And some of these are from before tanks came out, so disregard them. But you can see that a lot of my attackers go into this as the heavy bombers do as well. If we're looking just at a complete air RB, you're completely right. You should just have all of your crews in one slot. And, well, the reason for this is, as you said, to maximize crew points. Now, I don't think that's the right thing to do in tank RB, and that's just because, for me personally, I know for a fact that I can do a lot of damage from the air. If you believe you are a player who is much more useful in tanks than aircraft, then you should take 4 tanks instead of 2 aircraft and 3 tanks. But this is, my personal opinion, and what I know I'm good at. So therefore, your mileage may vary when it comes to it. So let's talk about why I only have 5 slots first. First of all, Legendary Toucan only has 5 slots. The majority of players in this game only have 5 slots because that is the default loadout. You have to pay Golden Eagles to recruit a new crew. So I always go off the basis that everybody only has 5 crews. And therefore it's a good starting block to talk about this stuff. So, if you comment about, oh, well, I have 8 crews and therefore I can bring, 6 tanks and 2 aircraft, why didn't you talk about this? Well, that's the reason why. The reason why is, in my head, I might be completely wrong, I'd have to see statistics, saying otherwise, but in my head it makes sense that the average player only has 5 crew slots, so we have to work from there. But anyway, let's get on to the tanks. So in my opinion, if you believe that you are efficient in tanks, you should just have the 3 highest BR tanks as you can. So in my case here, my Carnarvon is the tank which I use quite a lot for the British, therefore I want to set up a line around it. So it's at 6.7, so I should pick 2 of my tanks which are the closest to that. So we have the Tortoise, and then we have the Centurion Mark III at 6.3. So if you believe you are really good at the game, and you in your first spawn, let's say every time you go on your Carnarvon you always get 2 or 3 kills and a base capture, then you can get away with a system like this, basically just picking the best tanks you can. Now, the majority of players don't do this. And the reason for this is because either they're not confident in their first tank, or they just want a backup plan. You've got to remember that a heavy tank costs a lot of SP to get in the first place, which is why a lot of the time I actually go in the Centurion first. But generally, if you go in the Carnarvon first, you have to do pretty well in order to get that second spawn in a vehicle which is useful. So what a lot of players will do in their third crew slot is they'll bring an AA, and I am one of those players, because I'm not confident in my ability to be able to push forward. Now you talk about the idea of having a heavy tank slot and a medium tank slot and then maybe another slot. Well, I think that's a good idea to have. But the thing is, don't just limit yourself to heavy tanks and medium tanks. Luckily, around 6.7, you have two tanks. One is labeled as heavy and the other one is labeled as medium. If you want to go a bit more into it, you look at the FV-4202, which is also labeled as a medium, but very similar to the Carnarvon and Centurion when it comes to firepower and speed. It doesn't reverse too well, though. But you know what I mean. And so, therefore, you're very lucky around this to say, right, well, this is my medium tank crew, and this is my heavy tank crew. Now, let's go to a different BR. Let's say we'll go to 3.3, right? So we have the Cromwell. Cromwell Mark V, pretty good tank. So this is our medium tank. This is our medium tank crew. So now we need a heavy tank, because for some reason we just need a heavy tank for our heavy tank crew. Okay, and then we need another medium tank because we are confident in our ability to be able to push forward, and we don't need the AA because the AA costs less, and therefore bringing it in, if you get one shot in something like the Cromwell, maybe you can still get in that AA. So in this situation, we look at this lineup. And even though I've praised the Churchill Mark I in the past, I think it's actually a very fun tank to use. It's incredibly fun to use just because a lot of people shoot you in the tracks and they don't really know where to shoot you because, well, they just don't see a Churchill Mark I on the battlefield normally. I wouldn't take it over the Valentine. Now that may be a little bit shocking. The Valentine is pretty bad. It does have a good 57 on it though, also the smoke launchers on the side, has a good reload rate, isn't particularly quick, but compared to the 40mm on the Churchill Mark I would take the Valentine every time. So we're sat in a situation here where we've dedicated this crew to heavy tanks, and we have no budge room when it comes to, well, what if I do shit in this match? What if instead of the Valentine, I want to be able to take the, where is it? The AC Mark II AA, because I'm not confident in the Cromwell Mark V, which would be the first vehicle that I go in. So, if you decide to just have one crew just for medium tanks, and another crew just for heavy tanks, and another crew just for AA and tank destroyers, you're going to pigeonhole yourself around certain BRs. Whereas if you decide, here we go, this is how I did it. If you decide that instead of looking at it from a medium tank, heavy tank idea, why not just do it from which vehicles are the best at this BR and how can I fit it around it? Then that is the better way to go. Let's try and do an example of this. Right. Let's just see what crews I use for these. Okay. And this guy goes on the end. Right, so, let's say I am unlocking the Sherman 2 and the Cromwell 1, right? But while using the Cromwell 1, I should say. And also using the Churchill Mark I because, I don't know, why not? Because it's fun to run at people. So, when I unlock that Sherman, according to the idea that I should have a medium tank and a heavy tank crew slot, what would happen is, I would put the Sherman here, right? I would put the Sherman 2 on top of the Cromwell 1, and that would be the end of it, because I've technically upgraded my medium tank. But is this the best lineup that you can have? I don't think so. I think the Cromwell Mark I, even though it doesn't have a reverse gear and definitely struggles sometimes when people figure out where to shoot it, if I was going to take the Cromwell 1 and compare it to the Churchill Mark I, I would say the Cromwell one is better. So therefore, you would want to have the Sherman 2 and the Cromwell 1 in the same lineup. But if you stick to the rigid idea of having a medium tank line, a heavy tank line, and then a miscellaneous line, then you're going to struggle with those certain areas. You've got to remember that there is a hegemony of medium tanks in War Thunder. The game is basically based around them. The map design, the fact that they get all of the bonuses that tanks get, the fact that they are kind of nippy, they sometimes have good enough armor to do something, they all have guns which are designed to kill heavy tanks. So therefore, if you are dedicating a whole line to heavy tanks, then you're going to lose out on some of the firepower that you get from the mediums. So instead of just looking at these two crew slots as a medium and a heavy, it is a hell of a lot better to look at them as which are my two best tanks at the BR I'm trying to fight at. So let's say 5-7, right? Let's just go 5-7 real quick. What are my two best tanks at 5-7? Probably, which is very sad to say. Actually, no, it's the Comet, isn't it? The Comet's probably the best. There we go. Probably at 5-7, my best two tanks are the Centurion Mark 1 and the Comet, right? Now, once again, if I stuck to just having medium tanks in here, I wouldn't be able to take them both at the same time, and I would end up with some kind of Churchill Mark 7, yeah, it's the Mark 7. So, instead of doing that, once you research a vehicle, before crewing it, like putting it into a crew slot, you've got to imagine what is going to go around it. Is this vehicle going to be a centerpiece of a lineup, or is it going to be an add-on vehicle? An add-on vehicle in this sense would be something like a Tortoise or a Charioteer, or even something like a Challenger, if you wanted to throw that into the mix. So, if you are unlocking a great vehicle, you want to be able to use it, and you want to be able to use it with the second best vehicle that you have. So therefore, once you unlock it, before crewing it, just think about what lineup you're going to go for, and then, you know, basically plonk it and make that lineup. Now, you might be wrong, and that's completely fine, because you'll still have probably the best tank that you have, or at least the one that you researched, and one that you're comfortable in at that time because you've used it to research that tank that you're using now. But that's just something to take into consideration. Think of it more as which are the two best MBTs, or, you know, just tanks that I can use at this BR, and then the third slot should be a flex. It should be either, right, let's get AA in, so if I don't do so well in my Centurion, let's say I don't get to cap, I get shot in the turret a few times, my breach gets knocked out, then I get, you know, gunned to death over time while I'm repairing. Well, I'd like that failsafe, which would be the Crusader AA, which it wouldn't be, it would actually be the Crusader AA Mark 1. But let's say I'm confident in the Centurion, I'm going to be able to push forward, I'm going to be able to get some kills before I die. Well, then you put in the Challenger, and then you wonder why you put in the Challenger, and you go to bed, sleep, and throw the Challenger out of the game. But yeah, the third slot all comes down to confidence in yourself at that BR, and, you know, we'll go over it when we look at the other lots. So once again, for the Germans, we have one slot which is dedicated for bombers / attackers, you know, that kind of role. So if we look down here, just in the aviation, if we go more up, you can see the majority of my bombers are actually in this realm, or at least the newer ones. Wait. Yeah, so the Arado's in this one. The DO-217 isn't, because there must be a reason for that. Let's see. The reason is because I put the BF-109s in here. Right. So, anyway, so you have a crew for your bombers and attackers, and you know, sometimes fighters. And then you have another crew, which is, once again, more focused. Okay, this is the best way to look at it. You need one crew which is slightly focused on fighting enemy fighters, but not fully focused on it. And then you need another crew which is slightly focused on killing ground units, but not fully focused on it. Does that make sense? You need two hybrid aircraft vehicles, whether it is one bomber and one fighter, or whether it is two fighters which can carry ordnance, or whether it's a HO-229V3 and an Arado C3. And you may think, oh, well, this isn't very versatile. It's incredibly versatile. It has 220s on it. You can mark targets on the map. You can fight other aircraft. You can drop, obviously, 1,500 kilos worth of bombs. The Horton, well, you have those wonderful HVAP rounds, which are incredibly fun with their 95 millimeters of penetration. So you can kill tanks, you can kill planes, you can maneuver very well. So basically we have two kind of semi-hybrid vehicles at this BR. So then we get on to tanks. We start off with the Panther II. And the reason why I put the Panther II in this slot is if we look at the army. Come on. Before this, I had the Panthers, the Panther G and the Stur Emil. Now, with the Panther G, I was using mainly the Tiger II-H to be able to unlock the Panther II. But once I got the Panther II, what you don't want is a situation where you put the Panther II in the slot where you have the Tiger II-H, even though it might be your best crew, which as you can see it is here for me, just slightly, but it's still my best crew. You'd want probably the best tank to have the best crew. But you've got to remember that in a lot of battles, especially in realistic, you're going to have a situation where you are going to die, and therefore you need a second tank to back it up. So instead of putting it in over the crew slot of the Tiger II-H, only leaving yourself with the Panther G once you die in the Panther II, it is much better to look at it from a point of, well, I need at least two very strong tanks at this BR. There are certain BRs where this isn't going to be possible. The one which I just showed, which is Tiger II-H 6.7 Panther G, is an example of this. But if you are struggling with it, then you chuck in something like a Stur Emil and just try and shoot something. But I'm not confident in German tanks, especially at this moment in time around 7.0. IS-6s exist, M46s exist, a lot of people who don't know how to play the RU-251 exist, so therefore I have the Kugel. And that is why the Kugel is in my lineup at 7.0. But this is once again a hybrid crew. You can see it has all types of different machines in it, all basically used just to try and fill that third slot. It has the Tiger II-P. If I feel like I'm a bit more confident when it comes to fighting this BR, maybe the meta changes, maybe certain vehicles get changed in BR, maybe I chuck in a Tiger II-P as well as the H and the Panther II. Or maybe I chuck in the Ferdinand, which I would never do in a million years. Or maybe I throw in the Jagdpanther, which is always a possibility. But unfortunately I put a big red face on it, so you know exactly where to shoot it. But the thing is, the third crew has to be a hybrid crew. It has to be an AA if you are not feeling good about your situation in the game, if you have like a string of 3 or 4 battles. But you need your two crews to not just represent medium tanks, but the two best tanks at the BR that you're fighting at. And then we move on to the Americans. This is probably the classic example of actual confidence that I have in myself. I'm very confident in Americans at 4.7 being able to fight. And this is basically because of the 75 Jumbo. The 75 Jumbo, if we look at my ground statistics and take away that, we have 192 kills, 63 deaths. So, pretty much 3-to-1 KD in this thing. So because I have around about a 3-to-1 KD in this, the idea is that at the start of a match, when I spawn in this and when I go towards the cap point, I'm generally going to get 2 or 3 kills. I'm going to be able to get a cap, so I'm going to be able to get enough points to be able to afford another vehicle. So therefore, I don't need to put in an AA vehicle. I can just stick in the M6A1. And this can be a powerful thing, because on your third respawn, if you have a large tank with a pretty big gun on it, then what can happen is that, you know, generally people are used to AA running around, or maybe the enemy has a ton of AA running around, and what you do is, well, you get out your big gun and you do a lot of damage to it. We see the configuration of what I talked about before, where you have a fighter, which is more dedicated to fighting other aircraft, so in this case it would be the F4U-1C, and then you have another hybrid vehicle which is more focused on killing the ground, so the P-47N. You want vehicles which are tailored towards being versatile. It's where the attacker shines in War Thunder, apart from the fact that a lot of fighters can just do the attacker's role, such as the P-47 compared to the AD-2, a very sad existence for the AD-2. But as you can see, my lineup here is geared towards just having the best vehicles. It doesn't matter about heavy tank or medium tank or AA, because I'm confident in my abilities in the jumbo. That means that I can afford to have 2 other crews dedicated to other machines, and it's pretty much as simple as that when it comes to tanks. So you have 2 crews which are dedicated to your best tanks around that BR, and then you have a third crew which is a hybrid of an AA gun, or the lowest SP that you can get at that tier, or some kind of tank destroyer, or just another tank which can add to your arsenal if needed. You know, that around that 10-minute mark in the battle, where maybe you make one decision and win your team the game. And then when it comes to the aircraft, well, 2 hybrid aircraft is the best. If you can't do that, then you know, having one dedicated to more heavy bomber, medium bomber, and then one more dedicated to the fighters is a good idea too. You'll see this a lot with Japanese aircraft, because Japanese are probably the only nation now, apart from Italy, which their fighters don't really get very good ordnance. So therefore you'll have a fighter crew and then you'll have a bomber crew, kind of like how I do for my British, even though it's not warranted for my British. But yeah, I hope this helped out. It's probably a little bit convoluted. At the end of the day, it really does come down to if you think you're better in tanks or in aircraft. In my opinion, I can do more in the air, but because of the spawn point system, I'm kinda limited, so I need a tank. But throwing in 2 planes and throwing in 3 tanks seems to work pretty well. If you want to go 4 tanks and always have an AA slot, then go for it. And then you can, you know, put all of your aircraft points into one thing. But just remember, CAS will always dominate over tanks. It doesn't matter what War Thunder does. Even if they took all of the rockets and bombs and everything away from aircraft, I still think aircraft would have a massive role in the game, because they would just point out targets all the time, meaning that your team could win. So therefore, in my head, the aircraft are incredibly important in ground forces, but that doesn't mean you can't go 4-to-1 split. So hopefully this, you know, covers my opinions on why I do what I do when it comes to the crew slots. It's probably a little bit convoluted, but hopefully it makes some sense to you. Basically, I'm not going to go through it again. I've already said it a few times. Unfortunately, it's incredibly warm here, so I'm definitely a bit drazy, drury, whatever the word is. Anyway, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.